going to be this is probably going to be a long video. This is on the Ferdinand assassination, and how it leads to war. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand happened on the 28th of June 1914. The background of the assassination is actually quite important. First of all, it's worth understanding that Serbia had actually been involved in a couple of Balkan disputes prior to the assassination, so any theories about Serbia wanting to have a war as a country probably no, it wasn't the case. It wasn't going to happen. It wasn't viable, and this is because they were weak. They were weak after these Balkan wars, these Balkan disputes. On top of that, you have a lot of bad feeling towards Austria-Hungary within Serbia itself, following the Bosnian crisis, where obviously you've seen Bosnia taken, all right, into Austria-Hungary. Now, Balkan and Slav people were not happy. They didn't want to be a part of Austria-Hungary. Okay, you basically saw them paying punitive taxes towards the emperor. They were not happy to be part of this. They would much rather be back home in a united Serbia, so Bosnia and Serbia together, rather than be a part of Franz Joseph's Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, the issue would be that Franz Joseph was not going to be the emperor forever, and the man who was going to take over from him was his nephew, Archduke Francis Ferdinand. And Ferdinand was scheduled to make a visit to Sarajevo in Bosnia on the 28th of June 1914, and this would be quite an important event for the start of World War One, but also full of a lot of important decisions by Ferdinand himself. And the first one was that Ferdinand was actually using this as an early anniversary present for he and his wife, Sophie or Sophia, either will do. And she was not seen as significant rank to have married Ferdinand. So Ferdinand and Sophie was actually quite almost like a classic love story, you know. And he plans this visit because she hadn't been allowed on any visits before this with the Archduke in public. Now, the story goes, the rumours say that Ferdinand was very much aware that he was not going to have a popular welcome here because of the ill feeling that existed within Bosnia towards the Habsburg royal family. Ferdinand could have put the army on the streets that day, and he didn't choose to do so because he didn't want to appear as oppressive. As you know, this guy's one day going to rule over the Bosnian people, and he didn't want to be seen as an oppressive ruler. So he chose to allow the police to go on duty that day. I think it was 120 policemen on the streets, and he would go by a green open-topped car on his procession. Now, the visit was known about, it was well planned, and it was basically even publicised in the press the day before what route he was going to be taking. Now, the assassination was planned by a terrorist group called the Black Hand, and the Black Hand was about 2,500 members strong in Serbia at this point. And the leader of the Black Hand overall was a man called Dragutin Dimitrevich. His code name was the Bee, as in something that buzzes around in the summer, or Colonel Appy, Appy being a type of wasp. So you can see the connection between that and bee. And Dragutin Dimitrevich was also a chief of Serbian military intelligence, so he actually held this position high up in the Serbian army. Okay, so this is going to be important. Now, what happened with the Black Hand was that they chose a group of basically young men to assassinate Ferdinand on the 28th of June. The leader was a 19-year-old called Gavrilo Princip, and he had tuberculosis. Now, TB, tuberculosis, would attack your lungs. It was a killer. It still is if it's not treated properly. And he was ill anyway, so Princip knew he was going to die, and he had a very, very angry outlook towards the Habsburgs, towards the taxes that had been imposed, etc. So he was willing to do this job, and he would be assisted by 6 others on that day. Now, I'm not expecting you to remember every single name for this. The main one to assist him was Nejelko Kabrinovic. Now, whereas Princip was a trained marksman, in other words, he was better with a firearm, Kabrinovic, who also had tuberculosis, was also 19, was better at throwing bombs. So he was basically going to be like a suicide bomber. Okay, they'd be assisted on this day by others who I will touch on later on in the video. Now, the arms would be smuggled across international borders by a young man called Danilo Ilic. He was the fixer, and the fixer basically means that he makes sure that everything goes smoothly, he gets them the weapons, he gets them the materials, but he wasn't going to take an active killing part in the assassination. Okay? Also involved in this would be a man called Trifko Grabez, who was good at fighting, at street fighting, so obviously they're going to commit this crime in front of crowds of people. He was, as we say in the Northeast, handy. Okay? You also had a veteran of previous assassinations, the much more experienced Mohammed Mehmet Basic, and he was almost like the old hand of the team in his late 20s, and 2 schoolboys were brought along into the Black Hand to help them out, called Popovic and Kavrilovic. Okay, so there was 7 members on that day, and basically they see this as an act of liberation, and the reason they would carry out this assassination is quite hard to get your head around. Basically put, Ferdinand he's wanting to change things. He's a reformer. Now, there's a lot of different interpretations of Franz Ferdinand and what he thinks and who he was. He's seen as quite an arrogant man in a lot of historical accounts that are written about him. But Ferdinand wants to operate very differently to what his uncle Franz Joseph was, and he decides that he is going to give the people who are in Bosnia a better life, a better standard of living, and he's going to treat them better. They would be happier to be part of this Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, this is very good, so you'd be thinking to yourself, well, why would the Black Hand kill him? Alright? And the reason is that the Black Hand wanted a greater Serbia, so they wanted the people of Bosnia to stay angry, to stay upset, because if they get a better life in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they're not going to want to leave. They're not going to want to come back to Serbia. They're not going to want to form a greater Serbia at all. So Ferdinand was a great threat. So they hatched this plan to kill him. So what happened was, on the morning of the 28th of June, Ferdinand arrives at the railway station in Sarajevo. He and his wife Sophie, or Sophia, call them whatever you want, right? One of those 2 names will do. Get into a green open-top car, and they drive through Sarajevo in Bosnia, and they will go along what's known as the Apple Key. It's a quayside, so if you're from the northeast, think of the quayside in Newcastle. Okay, it is near the River Milchka, which is spelled Miljagger, and basically the terrorists line up basically along the quayside, along the Apple Key, and the first couple of terrorists did nothing. So you've got Danilo Ilic stood there watching, which was always his role. You've got Mohammed Mehmet Basic, who was the veteran, the old hand, the experienced one, who did nothing, right? So the next one in the line is actually Nejelko Kabrinovic, who is the suicide bomber, and he threw his bomb at the car. By all accounts, it deflected. He then took some cyanide, knocked it back, and jumped into the River Milchka. Now, he forgot the bomb had a 10-second delay, so this allowed it to be deflected quite easily. He also didn't know the river at this point was 4 inches deep. So he face planted into that basically, and the cyanide only made him vomit because it was out of date. So he was taken away and interrogated, and the rest of the terrorists take off to a nearby park, and Ferdinand, basically, the car speeds to the town hall where he meets a very surprised, I guess you could say, mayor of Sarajevo, and he's so nervous about meeting Ferdinand, who by this point is furious, that he just basically reads his traditional welcome of, we're really happy to see you and have you here. So it was obviously very unpleasant what went down in that meeting. The terrorists are at the park, and Ferdinand decides he's going to go to the nearby hospital and check on the people who were wounded when the grenade was thrown and did go off. Princip, and the examiners hate this, but he wandered off by all accounts to a place called Schiller's Delicatessen to buy a sandwich. And Ferdinand, in the green open-topped car, is heading back, and the driver takes a wrong turning. The driver was not involved in this plot at all. And it's into Franz Joseph Street, which was the same street where Schiller's Delicatessen was. So what you have is, you have the car basically in front of Gavrilo Princip. By all accounts, the gears jammed on the car. Princip, who'd finished his sandwich, everyone gets that point in, just pulled out his pistol basically and fired 2 shots. And one of them, by all accounts, hits Ferdinand in the neck, and the other one apparently ricocheted in the side of the car and hits his wife Sophie in the stomach, right? Gavrilo Princip takes the cyanide, which is again out of date, and he is wrestled to the ground. Sophie and Francis were both dead by 11:30. Now, Princip wouldn't give up information in jail. He was brutally interrogated, as was Kabrinovich. And from here, what you've got is Basic escapes. Illich was actually spoken to, brought in by the police for questioning because he'd been seen with the terrorists prior to the day before the assassination, and he panicked. He spilled the beans, and he said what had happened. So this would basically see all the links made between the Black Hand and Serbia. Okay, so the Black Hand links were made to Serbia. Princip and all the others actually here, apart from Illich, because they were 19 or under, were too young to be executed, so they got jail sentences. Now, Princip would die during World War I from TB. He wanted to be hanged because he was a martyr. He wanted to get sympathy on his side, and the same can be said for Kabrinovich, who again was too young to be hanged, and again wanted to be seen as a martyr, and they both died in jail. And the other lads basically got prison jail sentences, apart from Illich, who was over 19 years old, so he was executed, and Basic obviously had escaped back over borders and at this point was safe. The next video will explain how the Ferdinand assassination leads to the outbreak of World War I. Thanks for watching.